trials, tribulations, and lists. Not a standard theme for this week's study.
Have you ever spent some time reading the genealogy lists recorded in the Bible? How about the detailed descriptions of the articles from the temple that were confiscated from King Nebuchadnezzar? All these lists of names and detailed descriptions are in the record of the Bible for a reason. For what reason exactly?
Well, the lesson is not just about lists. They are interesting and important, but the lesson basically picks up on few different points that may not be necessarily interconnected, but provide valuable insights. The title talks about trials and tribulations too. And the core theme through all the items that the lesson goes through is that God cares and He is in control. For example, Daniel talks about the king of Babylon taking over the kingdom of Judah. He takes away the king of Judah and some of the items of the house of God. Ezra goes back to the same account, but is much more detailed. He mentions that they took 30 gold platters, 1,000 silver platters, 29 knives, 30 gold basins, 410 silver basins of a similar kind, and 1,000 other articles. All the articles of gold and silver were 5,400. Now, Ezra's point is different than Daniel's. It's about restoration, and in such scenario and case, in this process, it's important to be accountable and to be aware of what has been lost, what is taken back, and so on. The lesson also looks at the story of Belshazzar. It's so sad when we don't learn from history. Belshazzar knew the big story and dramatic experience of his father, but didn't learn from it. It was a dramatic ending with one big takeaway, that God is in control of history.
And we always say that the Bible is not a history book. However, there is a lot of history in it. Somehow God inspired His servants, His prophets, to write down some peculiar, some boring details that when looked under a magnifying glass, we can see a God that is really interested in preserving the history of things. And such an example is the record that is the duplicity between the chapter 2 of the book of Ezra and chapter 7 of the book of Nehemiah, where they both list the names of men of Israel by the descendants of tribes, the Levites, the priests, the musicians, the gatekeepers, the temple servants, repeated twice. Personally, I believe there is some recognition and praise that God wanted to seal in the memory of those men who followed His plan of action at that time. It's like somehow God was saying, these are the faithful ones, remember them and follow their example.
When you have names and numbers, it makes it much more tangible and real. One more point though that the lesson takes away of this too long list of names is from the mention at the end. They were in their cities. All these people were back to what was theirs. These, however, were the people that came back with Zerubbabel. Now, Ezra is compiling a new list with people ready to go back as a second wave.
It was almost for a century and a half that the Jews spent in Babylon. And all of them were born in the land of exile when Ezra left and headed back to Jerusalem. People had already their lifestyles established there, and their decision to choose the discomfort played a crucial role for them to leave and go back and rebuild the temple and the holy city. And that's why when Ezra was just about to start his journey back to the holy city, he went and he looked in the multitudes of people and he found no Levites there. How was he going to go back to the temple and to Jerusalem without priests and without Levites? The whole record of things is a story of human beings like us, who are being scared, who are being worried and feeling uncertain of what might happen if they just choose to go back to Jerusalem, what kind of trials and tribulations they have to endure on the journey and in rebuilding the holy city. It is so us to be like those Levites who withheld their choice of joining the travelers, at least at first, as we read.
Well, leaving one's comfort zone is challenging.
But after all, the group of men and women, together with Ezra, left and traveled back to Jerusalem. Interesting, Ezra chose to trust completely in the Lord when traveling back. He didn't even ask for protection and a small army from the king on the way back. No need to say that there was gold and silver and treasures and all the articles from the temple that they were carrying with them. Completely vulnerable as a group in the wilderness, all the leaders decided they're going to trust in the Lord because they remember the words in Deuteronomy chapter 30. He will bring you to the land that belonged to your ancestors, and you will take possession of it.
Now, there are some big lessons here. Ezra and Nehemiah, they knew and they trusted that God will fulfill His promise. They knew that the temple in Jerusalem, they will be restored. But they understood that it won't happen without opposition, without challenges, without misery and suffering. The lesson says they humbled before God. And now we have hard time to realize this in our lives. The challenges that we go through, the sufferings, the misery that we go through, they're not because God doesn't want to help us or that He can't. But it's a journey of restoration. Restoration from the terror of sin. It's a process, and it doesn't work by just God showing off His might and power and making things right the way we want it. The war was won. Restoration is certain, but it's a journey that has to be walked through. They humbled before God.
And the lesson ends with yet another story of trials and hard choices. Once the group has arrived in Jerusalem, a lot was casted to determine who stays and who is able to go back to their land and cities. And since everybody would have preferred to go back to their inheritance of land or cities, some people had to make a hard choice to stay back and deal with the challenges and the discomfort in the capital. However, their sacrifice was needed. And they made a commitment for God, not for comfort and not for their own personal gain and benefit, not for their own pleasure. That's why their names are distinctly recorded and mentioned by Nehemiah in his book, like many other lists of names in the whole Bible. Somehow, humbling are those moments that we read in the history of Judah. Are we being inspired by their example?
This lesson goes through some lists and episodes of trials and challenges, trying to read between the lines, and comes out with a message that God cares for every detail, for every situation, and He is in control. Join us again next week to continue the study with the lesson, Worshipping the Lord.